The gavel has fallen, and the verdict is loud enough to rattle the Sunset Strip. An independent arbitrator has ruled entirely in favor of Motley Crüe, rejecting every allegation Mick Mars brought against his former bandmates and ordering him to repay more than $750,000 in unrecouped tour advances. The decision also reaffirms the band's long-standing internal agreement. Once a member stops touring, they forfeit touring revenue, a clause Mars himself had supported back in 2008. It's a dramatic, messy, and undeniably historic moment. For the metal mistress, it's something deeper. Before the stadiums, before the pyro budgets, before the tabloid implosions, there was early Motley Crüe, a snarling, leather-clad beast clawing its way out of the gutters of LA. That era, Too Fast for Love, Shout at the Devil, was the metal mistress's holy scripture. The cracked vinyl soundtrack of her awakening. The moment she realized metal wasn't just music, it was a lifestyle, a weapon, a declaration of war on the ordinary. So when she speaks on this ruling, she does it with the authority of someone who once blasted live wire loud enough to shake the drywall. To her, this judgment isn't just a legal footnote, it's the latest twist in the mythology of a band that helped forge her identity, proof that even legends aren't immune to fracture, conflict, and the brutal machinery of business. Fracture didn't happen all at once. It began like most band implosions do, quietly, behind closed doors, with a decision that seemed simple on the surface but carried decades of weight beneath it. In October 2022, Mick Mars, stoic, skeletal, the eternal shadow figure on stage, announced he could no longer tour. His ankylosing spondylitis, the disease he'd battled since his teens, had finally tightened its grip. He said he was stepping back from the road, not from the band. To him, it was a painful necessity. To the rest of Motley Crüe, it was a seismic shift in the machine. The moment the statement hit the press, fans felt the tremor. Mick Mars was the anchor, the one who never overdosed, never quit, never spiraled. If he was stepping away, something serious was happening. The 2022 fallout had already cracked the foundation, but the hiring of John 5, and the letter that followed, was the moment the fracture became permanent. It's the scene in the movie where the music cuts out, the camera zooms in, and you realize the band you thought was unbreakable has finally hit the point of no return. When Mick Mars announced he could no longer tour, the Crüe machine didn't slow down. Stadiums were booked, contracts were signed, the tour had to go on. Enter John 5, virtuoso, longtime friend of the band, and one of the few guitarists alive who could step into Mars' shoes without the fans rioting. Behind the scenes, the decision was made quickly. Publicly, it was framed as a respectful transition. But for Mick, it wasn't the hiring that stung, it was what came next. Shortly after John 5 was officially brought in, Mick received a formal letter from the band's attorneys, cold, clinical, and devastating. The letter stated that because he had retired from touring, he was being removed from the band's corporate and decision-making roles. It cited the 2008 band agreement, the one that said any member who stops touring forfeits touring revenue and certain voting rights. To the band, it was business. To Mick, it felt like exile. He had expected accommodation. He got paperwork. He had expected brotherhood. He got a legal notice. He had expected to remain a full member. The letter told him otherwise. For 40 years, Mick Mars had been the quiet one, the stoic, the survivor, the guy who never quit, even when his spine was turning to stone. Now he felt replaced, marginalized, cut out of the band he helped build. The letter didn't just outline financial adjustments. It implied that Mick's role in Motley Crüe was no longer what he believed it to be. He did more than file a legal complaint. He opened a window into decades of tension, unspoken resentments, and conflicting visions of loyalty. His claims formed a portrait of a musician who believed he had been pushed aside, diminished, and ultimately betrayed by the very institution he helped create. Whether one agrees with him or not, the emotional weight behind his allegations is undeniable, and understanding them is essential to understanding the band's dramatic unraveling. At the center of Mick's argument was a simple but powerful assertion: he had not quit Motley Crüe. He had retired from touring because his body, ravaged by ankylosing spondylitis, could no longer withstand the physical demands of the road. But in his mind, stepping away from the stage did not mean stepping away from the band. He expected to remain a full member, contributing creatively and sharing in the profits of the enterprise he had helped build over 4 decades. Instead, he claimed, the band used his retirement as an opportunity to reduce his role, cut his income, and edge him out of the organization entirely. This sense of exclusion was intensified by the financial disputes that followed. Mick alleged that the band attempted to slash his share of touring revenue and diminish his ownership stake in the band's corporate entities. To him, these moves were not contractual formalities. They were punishments for a medical condition he had fought through for most of his life. He believed he was being treated as a liability rather than a founding member, and that the band was more interested in protecting its bottom line than honoring its history. Perhaps the most explosive of Mick's claims involved the band's live performances. He accused Mötley Crüe of relying heavily on backing tracks during the 2022 stadium tour, even going so far as to say Nikki Sixx did not play a single note on bass. For a band whose identity was built on raw, chaotic, high-octane performance, this allegation struck at the heart of their legacy. Mick said he was pressured to follow along with pre-recorded parts, a demand he found both insulting and artistically dishonest. Whether these claims were accurate or exaggerated became a major point of contention, but they revealed how deeply he felt the band had drifted from its roots. Mick also claimed that the band tried to undermine his confidence by telling him his playing had deteriorated. Given his physical condition, this was a deeply personal accusation. He believed these criticisms were not genuine concerns, but strategic justifications for replacing him with John 5. To Mick, the narrative that he could no longer perform was a convenient way to push him aside while maintaining the appearance of necessity. Underlying all of Mick's claims was a deeper, more human fear that his legacy was being erased. After decades of enduring pain, carrying the band through its darkest periods, and maintaining a level of musical consistency that grounded their chaos, he felt he was being written out of the story. The lawsuit, in many ways, was his attempt to reclaim his place in the narrative. Whether the arbitrator ultimately agreed with him or not, Mick Mars's claims reveal a man fighting not just for money or credit, but for identity. They expose the fragile balance between business and brotherhood, and the painful truth that even the most legendary bands are not immune to fracture. His allegations, rooted in hurt, pride, and a lifetime of dedication, became the emotional core of the Mötley Crüe civil war, shaping the public's understanding of a breakup that was decades in the making. The arbitration between Mick Mars and Mötley Crüe was not a spectacle played out in front of cameras or a jury. It unfolded in a quiet conference room, far from the roar of stadium crowds, under the measured authority of retired federal judge Patrick J. Walsh. Yet despite its private setting, the hearing carried the gravity of a band's entire legacy hanging in the balance. What emerged from those proceedings was a decisive ruling that reshaped the public understanding of the Crüe's internal collapse and dismantled the narrative Mick Mars had carried into the dispute. At the heart of the arbitration was the band's 2008 operating agreement, a document that had been drafted during a period when Mötley Crüe sought to stabilize its business after decades of chaos. The agreement contained a clause stating that any member who stopped touring would forfeit touring revenue and certain corporate rights. During the hearing, the arbitrator examined not only the language of this clause but also its history, and found that Mick Mars himself had supported and helped craft it. This became a foundational point. The very rule Mick was contesting was one he had once insisted upon to protect the band from instability. The hearing then turned to Mick's allegations. He had claimed that the band forced him out, cut his profits unfairly, and acted illegally in removing him from corporate roles. He also accused them of relying heavily on backing tracks during the 2022 stadium tour, even asserting that Nikki Sixx had not played live. These claims had fueled months of public controversy, shaping a narrative of betrayal and artistic dishonesty. But inside the arbitration room, where evidence, not emotion, held sway, these allegations did not withstand scrutiny. The arbitrator rejected each of them, concluding that the band had acted within the bounds of the agreement Mick had signed and that his accusations lacked the factual support needed to prevail. The lip-syncing and backing track allegations became one of the most volatile pieces of Mick Mars' dispute with the band, not because they were central to the contract, but because they struck at the heart of Mötley Crüe's identity. Mars claimed that during the 2022 stadium tour, the band relied heavily on pre-recorded parts and that Nikki Sixx, in particular, did not play a single note live. These accusations ignited a firestorm among fans, since authenticity, however chaotic, had always been part of the Crüe mythology. Inside Arbitration, though, those claims didn't hold up. When the evidence was examined, the arbitrator found no basis to support Mick's assertions and ultimately dismissed them entirely. In the ruling, the judge even noted that the decision dismantles the public narrative Mars promoted, a pointed reference to how seriously the allegations had shaped public perception. In the end, the lip-syncing claims became less a legal argument and more a symbol of how far the relationship had deteriorated, an emotional flashpoint that revealed just how betrayed Mick felt, even if the arbitrator concluded the facts weren't on his side. Financial records played a significant role in the proceedings. Mick had accepted roughly $750,000 in tour advances for a tour he ultimately did not perform. Under the terms of the band's agreement, those advances were recoupable against his touring income he forfeited when he retired from the road. The arbitrator ruled that the band was entitled to recover those funds. At the same time, the band owed Mick a payout for his quarter share of the corporate entity. After offsetting the amounts, the ruling left Mick owing the band a substantial sum. It was a stark reversal of the financial narrative he had presented publicly. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the ruling was its direct repudiation of the story Mick had told in interviews. The arbitrator wrote that the decision dismantles the public narrative Mars promoted, a rare and pointed statement in such proceedings. It underscored the extent to which the evidence contradicted Mick's claims about being forced out, about the band's live performance practices, and about the legality of his removal. In the arbitrator's view, the band had not betrayed him. They had followed the rules he had agreed to. By the end of the hearing, the emotional weight of the dispute remained, but the legal questions had been settled with clarity. The arbitrator ruled that the band acted lawfully, that Mick's retirement from touring triggered the contractual consequences he now contested, and that his claims lacked merit. The decision was a sweeping victory for Mötley Crüe and a painful defeat for Mick Mars, whose sense of betrayal could not overcome the written agreements that governed the band's business. In the end, the arbitration was not just a legal proceeding, it was the final chapter in a long, complicated relationship between four men who had survived fame, addiction, reinvention, and decades of shared history. The hearing stripped away the mythology and left only the facts. Even as the arbitration stripped away much of the public narrative he had built, one truth stood untouched: Mick Mars's artistic fire never dimmed. His solo effort, The Other Side of Mars, stood as proof. Free from the machinery of the Crüe and the compromises of stadium-sized spectacle, Mars delivered a record that was raw, inventive, and unmistakably his. The album showcased the tone, precision, and eerie melodic sensibility that had always set him apart, the very qualities that anchored Mötley Crüe's early sound. In many ways, his solo work became the most compelling counter-argument to the idea that he was fading or incapable. It revealed a musician still pushing himself creatively, still hungry, still capable of carving out something powerful on his own terms. Whatever the arbitration decided, The Other Side of Mars reminded fans that Mick's legacy was not defined by legal filings, but by the unmistakable voice of his guitar. And so, the curtain falls, not with a scream, but with a signature. The Mötley Crüe lawsuit, born from decades of chaos and sealed by a single retirement, ends not in reconciliation, but in resolution. The band marches on, legally fortified and theatrically unrepentant. Mick Mars, though defeated in court, walks away with something more enduring: his integrity, his solo voice, and a legacy carved in riffs that no contract can erase. In the end, this wasn't just about money or touring rights, it was about identity, ownership, and the brutal truth that even legends fracture. The Crüe may have won the battle, but the scars remain, for them, for Mick, and for every fan who believed the bond was unbreakable. And so ends the tale of Mötley Crüe, legendary headbangers whose legacy found its end in a courtroom. It would have been better if they burned out, but it appears they will simply fade away.
Keep shining.